And so many of you may say, well, I know when my 16-year-old is giving me attitude, but what do you exactly mean by attitude? Because attitude is a pretty general term, and we throw it around pretty loosely, telling our children not to give us attitude, that sort of thing. But really what attitude is simply the way we think or feel about someone or something. It's really just our thoughts, our feelings about someone or something. That's our attitude. However, attitude is more than just a thought, and it is most often displayed in our behavior, which you can see in this little girl here. She is displaying in her behavior, even though she's not saying how she thinks or feels about something, she is displaying very clearly how she thinks or feels via her body language. So you may say, well, okay, what does attitude have to do anything? Why is this relevant to weight loss and making healthy lifestyle changes? And the fact of the matter is that when we have a negative attitude or we have negative thoughts, that we tend to not meet our goals or make progress. So we may not have any weight loss or improved health. We may not get off our medications. Having a negative attitude related to any of your health-related goals can really impair and limit your ability to meet those goals. And beyond that, there may be secondary consequences that you're not aware of. So other than not meeting your weight loss goals, there may be more sneaky consequences, like emotional consequences of depression, anxiety, strained interpersonal relationships, sleep disturbance. And it's not hard to see how those things are related when we have a negative attitude. Think about people around us that have a bad attitude. It's hard to be friends with them. It's hard to be around them. Or even times when we have a negative attitude or outlook, we may feel more inclined to worry. We may feel more sad. We may have a harder time sleeping, that sort of thing. But there's also actual real health and physiological consequences to having negative thoughts or a bad attitude. So not only may you may not improve your health, but you actually may unintentionally make it work by causing increased blood pressure, increased risk for heart disease, inflammation, reduced metabolic functioning, headaches, gastrointestinal symptoms. A lot of folks don't realize how real physical symptoms like diarrhea, like stomach aches, like nausea, that sort of thing, headaches, really can be the direct consequence of our emotional status, how we're feeling and how we're thinking. Any thoughts or questions, feedback before I move on to the next slide? I'm going to try to take a pause and give you guys just a little time because I know it can take some time to process, think about what I'm saying, and then type something in. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. So basically a bad attitude, I like this saying, some of you may want to write it down and post it on your windshield in your car or on your computer screen. A bad attitude is like a flat tire. You can't go anywhere until you change it. So, okay, now that I've convinced you, hopefully, that a bad attitude is actually really detrimental to you meeting your goals and can actually make your physical and emotional health worse, you may be beginning to be influenced to think, okay, well, how do I change it? This is a lot easier said than done. I've hated exercise and had a bad attitude about exercise for the last 20 years, and now I'm just supposed to start liking it and feel differently about it. That sounds a lot easier than it actually is. So what are some real strategies I can take to try to transform my attitude? So one of the first steps is really taking responsibility, and I'm going to actually come back to the the feel better phenomenon a little bit later on in our discussion. But one of the things that we are all very much vulnerable to doing and probably do every day is we kind of have this mentality or way of thinking about things of saying the devil made me do it, or having sort of a victim mentality. And what I mean by that is we go from A, we skip B, and we go to C. So for example, here in my little picture, you have the rain cloud with this storm, right? The rain happened, and now I'm sad and upset because of the rain. I can't go on the picnic that I planned. I was looking forward to it, and it rained, and so now I feel sad, and it's the rain's fault. The rain made me sad. Blame the rain. But the fact of the matter is, rain is pretty much a neutral thing. Rain can't make us feel anything, right? We may feel like it makes us feel it. We may feel a victim of the rain. But the fact of the matter, rain is just a natural event. It can't make us feel anything. Unless we truly are made of sugar, it can't melt us or hurt us. And so what's happening in this situation is the activating event is the rain. The consequence is I feel bad or I feel sad or frustrated. There's actually a B in between the A and the C, and there's actually a belief or the thought that we are having about the activating event, which is the rain, that is leading to the consequent feeling of now I feel frustrated or upset. So there's something that we are telling ourselves. There's the belief or thought that is connecting the rain to our negative feelings. So take a moment to think about that. And I'd like, if anyone can, to volunteer what might be the belief or thought that someone might tell themselves that connects that activating event to the consequence. So again, there's the rain, and then there's a belief or thought that we have, and then there's a negative feeling of I'm upset and frustrated. What is it that we tell ourselves in between? Get my hydration in here. Okay, so one person said I can't do it when an activity is too hard, so we don't even try and we give up. That is an excellent example. So the situation may be that we're trying or we're tempted to try maybe to run a 5K. And then we tell ourselves we can't do it. Maybe even some other thoughts, it's impossible or it'll be too hard or I'm going to fail at it. And then the consequence is we don't even try, we give up. That's a behavior. And the feelings, maybe we feel like a failure, we feel hopeless. So it's not the 5K that made us feel hopeless. It's not even necessarily the challenge. It's the fact that we're telling ourselves we can't do it. That's a great example of something or a thought or a belief that we may say after an activating event that leads to negative attitudes, feelings, behavior. Another great example, A, the activating event, the number on the scale is higher than yesterday. B, I'm never going to lose weight. And then C, depression, sadness, frustration. And then Stacy, once depression is that consequence is a feeling, what might be the behaviors that come from the depression? Eat. That's a great example, right? So we're feeling down, hopeless, depressed, we're not motivated, we eat, we stop exercising, we start trying. So you can see how all these things are very much connected, and often it's a belief or thought that we're telling ourselves that are driving the consequent feelings and behaviors. You guys are doing great. You're getting it. So another way, sort of the jargon in the clinical world that we describe these thoughts is we call them automatic thoughts. And automatic thoughts are actually really important for us to spend some time talking about and identifying, because automatic thoughts are thoughts that we tell ourselves on a daily basis that become so ingrained in the way that we interpret life, interpret ourselves. They're inner, they're quiet, and they're daily and they're regular. And many of us, and this is the most important part, are not aware that we are saying these things to ourselves or about ourselves. These automatic thoughts are very sneaky. They're subtle, and many of us have been saying them to ourselves for a very long time. Sometimes these automatic thoughts and self-statements, that's just another way of saying automatic thoughts, are things that someone else taught us, maybe from when we were really young. They were messages that our parents or our peers um, sent us that we internalized and told ourselves over and over again and began to believe. Often these automatic thoughts are negative, critical, unfair, and not helpful. And they can play a big role in how we interpret an activating event, and then play a big role in our consequent behaviors and feelings. So I can tell you one of the automatic thoughts that I have pretty regularly, just in general, that I've become aware of. I often have um, sort of thoughts around being an imposter. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the concept of the imposter syndrome, but I often have thoughts around, I don't really belong here. If only they really knew, how, I don't really know what I'm doing here and I'm just winging it. And I don't know how I actually, got into this position or got this role, but one day they're going to figure out that I'm just sort of an amateur. I sort of tend to think about myself as an imposter and having kind of lucked my way into different opportunities throughout life rather than giving myself credit for, no, you're actually hardworking, you're skilled, you're bright, and you're good at this, and you've earned it and you deserve it. And that went all the way back to graduate school for me. I remember being like, how did I get in? And like, they're going to find me out and kick me out or whatever. So these are things that these are self-statements around kind of that subject matter that I struggle with on a daily basis. And imposter syndrome, those kinds of thoughts can apply with weight loss too, very easily, and with health changes too. How many of you have accomplished something significant, maybe exercise related, like run a 5K or done something you never thought you'd be able to do before, and then you're like, oh, but I'm not really an athlete. Like, you don't own that you're an athlete because you're not really an exerciser. You just did the 5K once and you walked half of it, and you start rationalizing. You're like, no, you couldn't really call me an athlete, even though you've been working out regularly and actually are, consistent with being an athlete. Or maybe you minimize your weight loss and say, well, it's just been a fluke. It's because of, the medicine, or it's because of full meal replacement or the shakes or, whatever. And you minimize and disregard all the hard work and the new behaviors and the good choices that you've made, and attribute your accomplishments to something else. Those are examples of how kind of that imposter syndrome can creep into making health-related changes. Anyone else have some examples of automatic thoughts that they struggle with regularly, or that they've noticed they struggle with throughout this program? Just want to check in, make sure everyone can hear me here. Am I still present? Okay, good. You guys are still there. Okay, so one person said it's hard to put into words, but something like, this is out of my control. Like, I can't change it. I'm hopeless or helpless to impact this. Maybe this is too big or too overwhelming for me to be able to overcome. I don't have the power, that sort of thing. These are great. I really, really encourage you to spend some time, whether it's as you're falling asleep at night or on a commute home from work, spend some quiet time really trying to identify what are those internal messages that I tell myself and have told myself. And you'll probably find that They extend not just to your weight and health related goals, but that they're kind of pervasive throughout your whole life. Many of us are not aware of what those self statements are, so they're not going to come to you easily. The reason that they're powerful and have such a big influence is because you're not aware or you're not entirely conscious of what you're thinking and the impact that it has. If you knew and you were really aware and conscious of the fact that you were telling yourself you were a loser all day, every day, you'd probably stop. The reason why they continue and they're powerful is because we're not fully aware and conscious of the fact that we're putting ourselves down or making unfair, unbalanced statements about ourselves. When I was in graduate school and I felt like an imposter and thought, wow, they're going to figure me out and they're going to kick me out of here, I wasn't stopping and thinking, well, no, I mean, they may think that I have more potential maybe than I do, but the fact of the matter is they invited me to attend this program based on my GPA, based on my CV, based on a lot of things that are facts. And so taking a step back and thinking in a more balanced way, and we'll get into that actually in the next slide, how we can try to reframe our automatic thoughts. But the first step really is having some honest, quiet time with yourself and identifying what are these messages I've been sending and saying to myself for a long time. And sometimes, like I said, they originate from other people in our lives, and we have assumed them as truths for ourselves. So I'll spend some time talking about some of this can be helpful to some of the, what I like to call stinking thinking, or unfair, unrealistic reasoning tools or strategies. So these are strategies that we may use to support our negative automatic thoughts, or they may actually be types of automatic thoughts that we have in and of ourselves. So the first one, the first strategy or kind of fallacy that we often fall for is emotional reasoning. What emotional reasoning means is that feelings are not fact. But anyone have an example, or can anyone define or describe what I'm saying here about emotional reasoning? Okay, we have one person saying they overgeneralize a lot. Yes, so we have someone say, as an example of emotional reasoning, is just because I feel threatened by someone or I may have an emotional reaction to them doesn't mean that they actually intend to harm me. That is a wonderful example. That is exactly right. Just because we feel a certain way does not mean that that is actually the fact or the reality of the situation. But what we tend to do, we're all humans, we all tend to do this, is we tend to assume that our emotions or whatever we attribute our emotions to are the reality of the situation. Just because I feel like I'm going to fail doesn't mean that I necessarily will fail. Now, granted, our feelings do impact our behaviors a lot, and so there can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, but ultimately what we feel is not necessarily the facts or the reality of the situation. Overgeneralization is another one, and one of the participants said that they struggle with this. So overgeneralization is when we take one incident that happens and then we generalize it to all the different situations or all the other situations in my life. So an example may be, in the past I've had weight regain, and so therefore every time I lose weight I'm going to regain the weight. Or at the past I was unsuccessful at this weight loss attempt, and so now I'm going to be unsuccessful at all weight loss attempts in the future. Illogical thinking, I think, can fall under a lot of these categories, but an example may be Just something as simple as nothing's ever going to change. It's never going to get better. That actually is pretty illogical. The fact of the matter is that there's, in many cases, sort of a 50-50 chance that things will get better. And it's highly unlikely that things will never absolutely ever get better for any of us. That is not a logical way of thinking. What about all or nothing thinking? Anyone have an example? I'm sure many of you struggle with all or nothing thinking. It's very common. Can anyone give an example of all or nothing thinking? So yes, these are great examples. And one participant said, if I wander off the program even a little bit, then I'm a failure and I quit. I have to be 100% perfect or I'm 100% failure. Another way of thinking about this is black or white thinking. There's no gray area. And a lot of folks do this. I see it a lot with full meal replacement, or not, maybe even not full meal replacement when they're on meal replacement. They have to follow their plan exactly. If I eat anything or have any meals when I'm on full meal replacement, then I've blown it and I've completely failed the diet. Or if I'm on one meal a day, but I end up having an extra meal or having a snack, then I've blown it. I haven't been perfect. I haven't been 100%. And what can often happen then is that becomes then the reason that we attribute our failure to. So I wasn't 100%, with my compliance because I had more than one meal a day a couple times, and so I therefore don't deserve to have lose the weight, or don't deserve to accomplish my goals because I didn't follow the plan and I'm a failure and it's my fault. And you can see where these things go. The next one is the tyranny of the shoulds. So I get this one all the time. Here's like the most classic should thing I hear is when someone loses weight, maybe they lose a pound that week when they weigh in, I should have lost 3 or 4, or I should have lost more. We are constantly plagued by what we should have done or what should have happened. And the fact of the matter is that typically we have no control about what should have happened. And once we are reflecting on the past and beating ourselves up about it, then we are at high risk for negatively impacting our current mood, our current thoughts, and thus our future behaviors. We can't go back in time and change things that should have been different. And so focusing on it is not helpful. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is it's easy to look back and say what should have happened or what you should have done because hindsight is 2020. But when you're in the moment, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in the future and what is the right decision to make. The other one is mind reading. And so mind reading often happens with other people. So folks may say, I didn't lose weight this week, so Dr. Art or MJ or Dr. Graves is disappointed, right? And maybe they didn't say anything that indicated they were disappointed, but you're reading their minds that they are disappointed. Or maybe you are mind reading that they will be disappointed, and so you choose not to weigh in that week or attend your appointment. Often we attempt to read the minds of other people, and that influences our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, and we're not as good at it as we think we are at mind reading. And then predicting the future. What are some examples of predicting the future that many of us do? Can anyone provide some examples? Any examples of predicting the future? So one person said it's always going to be this way. I'll always be overweight to some degree. That's exactly right. The other thing that I kind of wrote down here as an example is, even if I lose weight, people won't notice, or if I try to make healthy lifestyle changes, people won't support me, or I won't be able to sustain it. It's making judgments about the future um, that are not necessarily based on realistic data and that are slanted. Let's see what else some other participants said. So another example of predicting the future may be having unrealistic expectations for the future. So once I lose this weight, then I'm going to have the perfect body. Or I'll feel better. A lot of folks say, my depression will be resolved once I lose the weight. And sort of predicting the impact of the weight loss in a way that may not be accurate. Let's go on to the next slide. So here's where I say, yikes, that's expensive. How do I avoid paying the price? So this is just moving forward with how do I practice and make attitude change happen? And the thing that we've already talked about, the first step is really becoming aware of what are the negative thoughts and the unfair, unrealistic thoughts and strategies that we're using to validate our thoughts. So we can't change it if we aren't aware of it. So the first step is becoming aware of it. And then once we become aware of it, we can actually do this fancy thing called cognitive restructuring, which is really just a fancy way of saying, or jargon for saying, we can sort of challenge those thoughts and try to rework them. And so first we identify what our automatic thought is, and then maybe we underline some of the cognitive errors, like, is this fair? Is it balanced? Am I mind reading? Am I overgeneralizing? Kind of what strategies am I using to arrive at this thought? And then check the evidence for and against the thought and try to come up with a new, fair, more balanced thought. Now, this may seem like a lot of work to do with every negative thought you have every day. And the fact of the matter is, it is a lot of work to do. And it's not necessarily something you need to practice with or may not be realistic to practice with every negative thought that you have. But really identify where are some of your really problematic kind of negative attitudes. Is it around exercise? Is it around your self-image? Is it around weight loss, lifestyle change, that sort of thing? Where are some of your primary negative attitudes? And spend some time identifying what are the thoughts that you're telling yourself. What are some of those underlying cognitive errors? And then what is the evidence that supports that thought, that automatic thought, and what is evidence against that? We're going to get into more detail on that in just a minute. Eventually, what will happen is you'll identify your automatic thought, and then you'll move automatically to the last bullet point. The more you practice this strategy, you will get good at it, and you will go straight from identifying your automatic thought, coming up with a new and fair, more balanced thought without having to go through the other steps. And then eventually, believe it or not, I promise you, if you practice this, your old negative automatic thoughts will be replaced by the new, fair, more balanced thoughts. And you will find that you are having more fair, balanced thoughts in various aspects of your life, not just on the one topic or one automatic thought that you are working on. So the fact of the matter is, the more that you practice this, the easier and quicker it will get, and it'll start transferring to all aspects of your life. It really is, it's an empirically supported treatment. There's lots of science that supports it. And so this intervention, though it may seem a little tedious or silly, is very, very effective and is not necessarily something you have to do for the rest of your life on every negative thought you have. So let's go into a little bit more detail here. So here's your homework, and we're going to practice one together here. So let's come up with, I wrote one down here. Let's say that, and I'll write this out if it makes it easier. The negative event is, or the event, not necessarily negative, is I didn't lose weight this week. So that goes in the first block. Okay. And now I'm gonna also tell you what the feeling is. My feelings are disappointed and irritated. Okay, so that goes on the feeling box. What would be examples of automatic thoughts that are connecting the event of I didn't lose weight this week to the feeling of disappointment and irritation? So anger is the feeling. What would be the automatic thought? We've got it's my fault and I did something wrong. What might be some other automatic thoughts? I failed. That's actually a really good one. Let's go with that one. They're all good. But let's say now, okay, so we have or I don't deserve to lose weight. That's good too. Let's go with I failed. So the event, again, is I didn't lose weight this week. The automatic thought is, and I'll write this out too. Let me write it all out. Event, didn't lose weight. Thought, I failed. And so now that, and the feeling, disappointment, irritated. Okay, so what might be, when we're looking for evidence for and evidence against, we're focusing not on the feeling, but we're looking for evidence that supports the thought. The thought is I failed or I'm a failure. What might be evidence for the fact that I'm a failure? Okay, so one participant said that the first thing that's great is I didn't lose weight. So evidence for being a failure is I didn't lose weight. What else? What other evidence? Okay, another person said I didn't stay on the program. So I'm a failure because I actually deviated from what I was supposed to do. I'm still overweight. Another one may be I'm a failure. So the evidence that we may say for is I'm a failure because I gained the weight in the first place, right? That may be evidence for. Or I'm a failure. Another one I hear often is because I couldn't lose the weight on my own. Do those make sense? Are those things you think that someone may say to support? What else might someone say to support the fact I'm a failure? So I'm a failure because I didn't follow the plan, I didn't lose weight, I gained this weight in the first place, and I couldn't lose it on my own. I had to come here and get help. So clearly I'm a failure at this, right? That's reasonable evidence for being a failure. What might be evidence against being a failure? I know this is a little tricky because it's hypothetical, but put yourself in the situation just for yourself. Let's say you have a week where you don't lose weight and you're calling yourself a failure. What things for you would be evidence against the fact that you're a failure? I lost the previous 3 weeks. Wonderful example. What else? Another one may be evidence against, maybe I'm still here trying. I haven't given up. I haven't failed because I can still lose weight next week. I'm still here trying. I haven't given up. Another evidence against, maybe I didn't lose weight this week, but there's lots of things I was successful at this week, such as I journaled, even if I was off plan. I avoided snacks in the snack room. I weighed daily. So these are examples of things that many of us, so if you think about it, when we call ourselves a failure, we're committing the cognitive error of overgeneralizing, because we are determining our entire identity around one metric, which is whether or not we lost weight. But typically, if you look back over the past week, we can all identify many things that we did successfully that were on plan, even if we did eat off plan. Let's say I ate off plan every single day. Did I journal it? Did I journal the fact that I ate off plan and wrote down and followed that direction? Did I weigh daily? Am I still coming in for my appointments? There's lots of things that I am still doing well. Just because I did one thing, bad, which was eat off plan every day, doesn't mean that I'm a failure, that everything I've done is bad. Does that make sense? So what might be a more balanced thought? And by more balanced, it takes into consideration the evidence for and against. So I'm not asking you to come up with something that's, all candy and roses and fairy tales and pony, and unicorns. Something that's balanced, that takes into consideration the evidence for your negative feelings or thoughts, but also evidence against. So a great new thought was, this week was not so great, but I always have next week. Now, what new feeling might arise from this week was not so great, but I always have next week? Or another great, more balanced thought is, I've made a lot of progress doing this program imperfectly. I love that. Now, our feeling before from our automatic thought was disappointed and irritated. Now that we've reframed our thought to something that's more fair and balanced, what might our new feeling be? One person said hopeful. Yes. So when I tell myself this week was not great, but I always know next week, I'm future oriented and I'm hopeful. Any other feelings? Relieved. Great. Maybe optimistic. Might be another one. We're not feeling guilty. What would be the opposite of feeling guilty? Feeling, I don't know, gracious, forgiving. And when we enter the world, let's say you come in here, you don't lose weight, you're feeling frustrated and irritated, and then you do some reframing and you say, well, I've made a lot of progress even though I'm doing this imperfectly. So now you're feeling hopeful, relieved. Now, what's likely to happen next as you walk out these doors and enter the world? It's those new thoughts and hopeful thoughts are likely to leave you less stressed, less vulnerable to giving up, to emotional eating, to depression, to avoiding the gym because what's the point anyway? It puts us in a position of power and in a position where we're much more likely to engage in behaviors that are consistent with meeting our goals. So I really encourage you to take this strategy and practice it throughout the week. Um, and do it intentionally. Set aside some time, maybe in the evening. Pick a few events and thoughts, the ones maybe that stand out the most to you throughout the day. Where one way that's can be really helpful to identify which things to restructure is where did I have really strong feelings? Where did I feel most annoyed today? Guilty, angry, irritated, hopeless, and then trace back from the feeling what was the event and what was the automatic thought. Because, like I said, you will not have to do this level of detail of work forever to restructure your thoughts. Over time, you'll just be able to do it automatically. You'll immediately start being able to kind of restructure and come up with a more balanced thought in the moment. And then eventually, the more balanced thoughts will actually replace the old negative, slanted thoughts. All right, so if all else fails, if you really struggle with cognitive restructuring or find it's confusing or not helpful, the good news is that there's lots of different ways that you can intervene to transform the way that your attitude, the way you think, and the way you feel and the way you behave. So the good news is all of these things, thoughts, neurochemicals, behaviors, feelings, are interconnected and they all influence one another. Now, sometimes patients can find that overwhelming. Well, of course, I have such a hard time making lifestyle change because it's not just doing one thing. I have to change my behaviors, my feelings, my thoughts. There's a neurochemical or physiological component. This is overwhelming. The good news is that because all these things are connected, you can actually change one part of any of these parts of the system and have a positive impact. So if you're not able to restructure those negative thoughts, then what you can do is maybe change your behavior, and then positive feelings and thoughts will follow the new behavior. So I think someone said earlier, fake it until you make it. That's a very good example. Faking it till you're making it doesn't always mean that you're restructuring your thoughts, but what it means is you're behaving in a way consistent with the way you want to think. So you may still have a bad attitude of exercise, about exercise, but you're going to behave as if you don't have a bad attitude, which means you're going to go to the gym, every day or 3 days a week and do it, even though you have a lot of thoughts about not liking it or maybe even feelings. And over time, the more you behave and fake it like you like it, your feelings and thoughts will follow. And so that's kind of the concept of fake it to make it. When we behave differently, the way we feel and think about those behaviors follows the behaviors. Does that make sense? And neurocognitively, or with regard to neurochemicals, sometimes things that can be really helpful that neurochemically that can help our feelings or thoughts or behaviors can be medications, whether that's antidepressants or even maybe obesity medications that really help out with hunger and satiation, that sort of thing. Sometimes we can make physiological changes that can impact the system so that our behaviors are improved, our feelings are improved, and our thoughts are improved. If you do feel like you need more help with this, if this is really ringing a bell, you can also seek professional help. So that would mean talking to Dr. Ard or one of the medical providers here about medications, but they could be mood medications or it could be obesity medications to help with hunger and satiation and intrusive food related thoughts, that sort of thing. Or you could seek counseling where you work one-on-one with a counselor to spend more time and have more accountability doing what we described as cognitive restructuring. That's often known as cognitive behavioral therapy. Some of you may be familiar with that. So if you can't do, the bottom line here is if you can't do the cognitive restructuring, intervene where you can. There's lots of different ways and places that you can intervene that will affect, positively impact the entire system. All right, so we just have a few minutes left. Does anyone have any questions or feedback or responses or advice for the group? Anything that's worked for you? Anything you need help with? Anything you've realized today that you'd like to share? Have you guys ever heard about this kind of cognitive restructuring before, or stinking thinking? Is that a new concept for anyone, or have many of you heard about it before? Okay, so we have some good questions coming through now. One person said, how long to change or adjust your initial thoughts? And that's actually a really good question. I wish I could tell you, practice this twice a day for 2 weeks and you'll be cured. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I think it depends a lot on how deeply ingrained the thoughts are. Um, but what I will say is that the more frequently and consistently you practice adjusting or changing those thoughts, so, if you do it several times a day and you stick at it for days, it starts getting better pretty quickly. So if you're consistent, within a couple weeks, you'll start seeing a change. But if you're not consistent, like you're only doing it maybe once a day and then you skip a few days, the less consistent you are, the longer it takes. So you should, if you're doing it consistently and really focusing on this, spending, even if it's as little as 15 minutes a day, thinking about it, and then trying to do it a little bit in the moment when you notice yourself having stinking thinking, you should notice a difference within a couple weeks. So we have someone else that has reached out, which is great, saying, I don't know how to ask for help at the clinic. I'm really struggling with the program right now, but don't really know where to make contact. So I certainly want to help you with that. Does anyone else have any input or help for this individual who feels like she's having a hard time knowing how to ask for help? Anyone else needed help from the clinic and reached out and asked for it? Stacy, do you mind giving a little more information about what you're struggling with, kind of where you feel like the difficulty lies? Okay. So it looks like you're typing right now, and I understand it's not the most efficient way to communicate. The thing that I would say is what I find is most helpful for patients is if they reach out to the person that they feel like they have the strongest connection with. So some folks have seen the same medical provider multiple times, and they feel a connection to that provider or a nutritionist or a behaviorist. And so even if it may not seem entirely relevant to that discipline, and it can be really helpful to talk to them, the person that they feel safe and comfortable with. Sorry, I was just reading this. So you said you're transitioning from liquid to food and I'm very hungry. So that is a really, really common point of difficulty. I'd say for most of the people in the program, that transition is the hardest part of the whole program. So you are absolutely not alone. And the other thing too is we really don't want you to be hungry. If you are truly hungry, having physiological hunger, then we are doing something wrong and we need to make some adjustments to your meal plan. Trying to think about how we can move forward with helping you. Stacy, do you use My Wake Health? Can you message either me or one of your providers so that we can reach out and try to help you? I'm concerned that I might not be a provider available to you to message. Just waiting to see a response. So, Stacy, how about we do this? Call Baptist Hospital and or call the Access Center, or call Kathy if you know Kathy, and ask to speak to me. You may not get me in the moment, but they'll send a message to me and I'll call you and we'll game plan one-on-one about what to do next. But I just want you to know that you're not alone. Without a doubt, transitioning from liquid to food is the most difficult time, and there's a lot we can do to help you. And like I said, we really do not want you to be hungry. So we may need to add in some more food and talk to you a little bit more about what's going on. It's really scary for a lot of folks. They have a lot of anxiety about transitioning back into food, often because they have a lot of automatic thoughts about it, like I'm going to lose control, or food is the reason I gained all the weight. I can't control myself with food, that sort of thing. And we can really address that and help you through it. So what I'd ask you to do is just call in, ask to speak to Chanel, and they'll send me a message, and I'll contact you right away, and we'll come up with a game plan. We have just a couple minutes left. Is there anything I can do to help anyone else who's participating in group today? All right, guys. Well, thank you for your patience with me. Like I said, a little bit rusty with leading virtual group, and it's always a little different not having a live audience that's providing verbal feedback and even nonverbal feedback. You can't see you guys, but I hope that you found today valuable, and I'm so glad that you all chose to attend and spend this hour with me. And I look forward to leading again in the future.